It began as a shadow, a whisper in the sky, a rumor carried between hangars, between officers, between pilots who thought they had already seen the deadliest machines the Americans could build. But then, something new appeared. German pilots laughed at first. They mocked the ungainly twin-boom silhouette, sneered at the idea of a night hunter, and scoffed at the claim that this strange aircraft could see in total darkness. See in the dark? Impossible. They told themselves the Americans were bluffing, clinging to some desperate miracle as their cities burned and their convoys strained under endless raids. And yet, in war, arrogance is often the first step toward disaster. Imagine yourself in 1944. The night sky over Europe is alive with menace. German bombers slip past defenses, their black bellies hidden against the stars. Sirens wail, searchlights claw upward, anti-aircraft guns bark blindly into the void. And yet the raiders return again and again. What? Because the Allies have no true weapon of the night. Fighters built for daylight are helpless once the sun sinks. Radar on the ground can guide them only so far. Most interceptions end in frustration, in shadows lost, in bombs falling where families sleep. How long could the Allies afford such helplessness? How many nights could London, Paris, Antwerp, or Liège endure before morale broke completely? The call was clear. Something radical had to be built. Not a modification. Not a compromise. A true predator of darkness. Enter Northrop's creation, so strange, so unlike anything before it, that even American pilots hesitated at first. It wasn't sleek like a Mustang or a Thunderbolt. It was massive, brooding, with engines like thunderheads and a nose that hid secrets no one had ever dared place in a fighter before. The Germans saw it and they laughed. They thought they were safe, wrapped in the cloak of night. They believed the Widow was clumsy, untested, nothing more than propaganda painted in black. But what happens when mockery collides with reality? What happens when a pilot who once jeered suddenly feels the invisible gaze of radar sweeping across his tail? What happens when the first tracer rounds rip through the darkness, not from a pursuer he can see, but from a ghost he never even sensed was there? This is not just the story of an aircraft. It is the story of how technology, desperation, and raw ingenuity turned the night from Germany's shield into America's hunting ground. The P-61 Black Widow, Northrop's monster of midnight, wasn't just a machine. It was a warning. And for those who laughed, for those who dared to dismiss it, the warning came too late. Night fell heavy over Europe. Not the calm, star-dusted night of peace, but a suffocating darkness fractured by explosions, by the drone of engines, by the rising panic of civilians who could only wonder, where will the bombs fall tonight? In 1940 and 1941, the Luftwaffe had perfected the art of terror after sunset. Bombers took to the air under moonlight, confident that once shadows cloaked their wings, they were untouchable. Searchlights sliced upward, combing the heavens with desperate beams. Anti-aircraft gunners strained their eyes, their ears, their nerves, but what good were shells without a target to aim at? And even when luck or coincidence locked a searchlight onto a bomber, the glare lasted seconds before the target vanished again into darkness. The cities paid the price. Factories, rail yards, and neighborhoods erupted in fire. Windows shattered, bridges collapsed, and children learned to sleep in bunkers. Every raid that slipped through the cracks wasn't just steel and rubble, it was a psychological wound, a message: the night belongs to us. But who owned the night? The Allies had fighters, Spitfires, Hurricanes, P-40s, but they were children of daylight. Their eyes needed the sun. Their wings had been shaped for battles fought under blue skies where silhouettes were sharp and glints of metal betrayed an enemy's position. At night, those same machines became blind giants. Pilots took off, squinting into darkness, sometimes guided by ground controllers, sometimes chasing the brief flicker of exhaust flames. Too often they returned with nothing to report but frustration, if they returned at all. How could they fight shadows? How could they strike what they could not see? The British tried improvisation. They bolted early radar sets onto existing airframes, squeezed antennas where they could fit, and prayed that the technology would behave in combat. Sometimes it did. More often it failed at the worst possible moment. Pilots cursed as screens fizzled into static, or as heavy equipment dragged performance down until they were prey instead of predator. Reports from the front grew grimmer each week. Bombers were getting through. Cities burned. Morale trembled. The public wanted answers, but commanders knew the bitter truth: there was no weapon of the night. until someone dared to imagine one. In both London and Washington, whispers spread through the halls of command. Could a plane be built not for daylight, not as a modification of an existing fighter, but as a creature of darkness from its very birth? Could engineers craft something with the stamina to patrol for hours, the senses to see without light, and the teeth to tear apart even the heaviest bomber? It sounded impossible. It sounded reckless. But was the alternative, watching cities crumble, watching the war slip away in the dead of night, any more acceptable? So the challenge was issued. The call went out to industry. Build us a night fighter. Not a guess, not a retrofit. A purpose-built Predator. And in California, at the Northrop Company, a team of engineers accepted that challenge with a mix of fear and exhilaration. They knew what was being asked was unprecedented. They knew they would have to invent as much as they would design. And yet they saw something else too, an opportunity. What if this could be done? What if they could prove that the cloak of darkness, once Germany's greatest shield, could be ripped away? The year was 1940 when sketches began. But these were not ordinary sketches. On paper emerged a strange beast, a twin-boom design, vast in scale, unlike the sleek thoroughbreds of daylight combat. At its heart, a bulbous central nacelle where not one man, but three, would work together in a symphony of destruction. A pilot at the controls. A gunner to wield the stinging bite of heavy machine guns. And, most radical of all, a radar operator sitting behind them, eyes not on the horizon but on glowing screens watching for the invisible. Who had ever heard of such a thing? A crewed fighter with a man dedicated only to guiding by radio waves? It was madness. It was brilliance. It was both. The Allies weren't just asking for speed and firepower. They were asking for vision and blindness, for clarity and chaos. And so, into the nose of this strange design, Northrop's engineers placed something no fighter had ever carried before, the SR-720 radar. A dish 30 inches across, rotating like an unblinking eye, sweeping the skies 5 miles in every direction. Think about what that meant. For the first time in history, a pilot didn't need to see with his eyes to stalk a target. His radar operator could whisper in his ear, turn 10 degrees left, climb 200 feet. Target closing, 90 seconds to contact. Could anything be more terrifying to an enemy than realizing you were hunted not by sight, not by chance but by science itself? By late 1940 the concept was more than paper. It was a commitment. Northrop poured resources into it, sculpting a machine that would be nearly 50 feet long, with a wingspan wide enough to carry not just radar and crew but the fuel for hours of night patrols. Beneath its skin, twin Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines growled with 2,000 horsepower each, the same kind of power plants that hurled thunderbolts and Hellcats across the skies. It was heavy. It was massive. And yet, in its weight lay endurance. The Black Widow, as it would come to be called, wasn't designed to dance in the sun like a Spitfire. It was designed to lurk, to stalk, to strike when no one expected. Of course, skeptics lined up quickly. Some sneered, too big, too heavy, too complicated. Others muttered, a radar operator? That's dead weight in combat. One more man to lose. And among German pilots, rumors began to trickle out. Whispers of an American night monster. But when they saw sketches or grainy photographs they laughed. What was this, they asked, a bomber pretending to be a fighter? Did the Allies really believe a machine so ungainly could catch them? But arrogance has always been the enemy of survival. Because what they did not yet understand, what they could not yet see, was that this ungainly predator was not built for show. It was built for them. And soon, when the first Widow spread its wings against the darkness, laughter would die in the throats of those who mocked. The first time someone laid eyes on the P-61 Black Widow up close, the reaction was rarely admiration. It wasn't beautiful in the way a Spitfire cut the sky or how a Mustang gleamed under sunlight. It was intimidating. Broad wings stretched 66 feet tip to tip. Twin booms jutted backward like claws, each carrying the thundering heart of a Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine. Between them sat the swollen nacelle, almost insect-like, housing 3 men and an arsenal of secrets. It looked more like a predator than a plane. Was that coincidence, or destiny? Step inside that central fuselage and you'd see why this machine was unlike anything before it. In the very nose, tucked behind a sleek black dome, spun the most important organ of all, the SR-720 radar. This wasn't just an add-on, a gadget bolted onto an airframe. No, This radar was the very soul of the aircraft, the reason for its existence. Imagine the glow of that screen inside the cockpit. To the radar operator, ghostly blips drifted across a circular display. Each blip was more than just a signal, it was a heartbeat in the night, an enemy plane flying blindly, unaware that it had already been marked for death. But radar alone could not win a battle. What good was detection without destruction? That's where the rest of the crew came in. At the front sat the pilot, hands wrapped around the yoke, ears listening for the calm, precise instructions from the man behind him. The radar operator was the mind's eye of the Widow. The pilot was the fangs. And above them, perched in a rotating dorsal turret, sat the gunner, the sting in the tail, swiveling 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns in any direction the fight demanded. This was not one man's warplane. This was a symphony. 3 men, 3 roles, 1 purpose, to turn darkness itself into a trap. The Black Widow carried firepower to match its name. Along the belly, 4 20mm Hispano cannons pointed straight ahead. Together with the turret above, they gave the Widow the bite of a heavy bomber and the precision of a fighter. A pilot could choose, lock the turret forward for devastating frontal volleys, or let his gunner swivel independently to rake the skies. What did that mean for an enemy? Imagine you're flying a German Junkers or Messerschmitt, believing the night is your shield. Suddenly cannon shells rip through your fuselage, and before you even know where they came from, tracers rake across your wing from a direction you didn't expect. Do you bank left? Climb? It doesn't matter. The Widow is already adjusting, already reading your moves, already ready to kill. Even the cockpit lighting was carefully designed. Instead of the usual harsh white or green, the P-61 glowed in blood-red illumination. Why red? Because it preserved the crew's night vision, letting their eyes stay sharp when they glanced outside. No detail was too small. Everything was tuned to the single mission: own the night. Yet stealth was not only about radar and guns. Stealth was about being unseen until it was too late. And here, Northrop's engineers discovered something extraordinary. In 1943, under the humid skies of Florida, tests were run with different paint schemes. Olive drab, flat black, glossy black. What difference could paint possibly make, you might ask? But when searchlights probed the sky, the truth became chillingly clear. Under gloss black, the P-61 all but vanished. Even when beams struck it directly, the surface reflected light in such a way that the plane dissolved back into darkness. In 80% of test passes, observers missed it entirely. 80%. Against searchlights. Can you imagine the effect this had on crews who would soon fly into the heart of Axis defenses? Can you imagine the terror of gunners on the ground, swinging beams desperately while a hunter glided above them, invisible until its guns roared? From that moment forward, every P-61 rolled out of the factory in glossy black, polished to a mirror sheen where possible. This wasn't just paint. It was a shroud. A cloak of invisibility for the world's first true night fighter. The numbers alone tell part of the story. Nearly 50 feet long. 29,000 pounds at combat weight. Fuel capacity for 646 gallons, enough to prowl for hours over enemy territory. Twin radial engines delivering 4,000 horsepower combined, pushing the Widow to speeds over 360 miles per hour. Not the fastest fighter in the world, but fast enough to stalk, to close, to kill. And more importantly, strong enough to climb where bombers flew, and stable enough to keep 3 men alive while instruments glowed in the dark. Even the landing gear was designed with night in mind. Tricycle gear, not the tricky taildraggers that so often flipped or skidded on blackout runways. How many lives were saved just by that one design choice? How many missions succeeded because pilots could bring their birds home safely in the dead of night? It's easy to think of technology as cold numbers, miles per hour, pounds of thrust, calibers of guns. But for the men inside, these details were lifelines. Every pound of fuel meant another 30 minutes of patrol. Every degree of radar sweep meant one less chance of surprise. Every red lamp meant eyes that could still distinguish shadow from horizon when the moment of combat arrived. The Widow was more than the sum of its parts. It was the answer to a prayer whispered under the thunder of bombs. God, let us see them before they see us. And yet the enemy laughed. German pilots, upon hearing of the Widow, scoffed at the idea. Too slow, some said. Too fat, said others. They were convinced that American desperation had birthed a monstrosity doomed to fail. To them, this strange black insect in the sky was a joke. But what is more dangerous than mocking a predator you have not yet faced? For soon the widow would enter service. And soon, those same voices that mocked would turn silent, silenced by the roar of cannons, by the shriek of tearing metal, by the sudden knowledge that the night no longer belonged to them. January 1944. Los Angeles. 75,000 people gathered at the Coliseum for an Army-Navy show. Searchlights crisscrossed the heavens, horns blared, the crowd craned their necks. Suddenly a roar split the night. All eyes turned upward. They could hear it, two engines growling like thunder, but they saw nothing. The beams stabbed at the sky, frantic, but the aircraft remained a phantom. It was a demonstration, yes, but it was also a warning. The Black Widow had arrived. By spring, the first production P-61s crossed the Atlantic. England's airfields welcomed them with cautious curiosity. Mechanics examined the glossy black finish, brushing fingertips along the mirror-like skin. Pilots tested the radar, marveling as the screens bloomed with signals invisible to the naked eye. And commanders? They felt hope that at last the endless stream of night bombers would meet their match. The 422nd and 425th Night Fighter Squadrons were among the first to take the Widow into European skies. Their orders were simple: intercept. Hunt the buzzing V-1 rockets streaking toward London. Hunt the bombers slipping through moonlight. Hunt whatever dared to believe the night was still theirs. But was it really so simple? The Widow was powerful, yes. Its radar was extraordinary, yes. But combat is never as straightforward as a blueprint. Crews had to learn how to speak a new language, how to trust radar over instinct, how to time interceptions in complete darkness, how to coordinate between three men in the cockpit when seconds meant survival. The learning curve was steep. Some missions ended in frustration, radar contact lost in clutter or ground interference. Some ended in near disaster, when the turret's mechanical quirks caused it to jam at the worst possible moment. And chasing fast German twins like the Me-410 proved difficult. In level flight they could sometimes slip away, their engines screaming as they pushed beyond 400 miles per hour. Did this mean the Widow was flawed? Or did it mean crews were only beginning to understand its potential? One night over France, Lieutenant Edward Garrison, his name changed here to protect the legends that followed, locked onto a signal. His radar operator guided him steadily closer. Target bearing 310. Range closing. 1 mile. Half a mile. 200 yards. Then in the black void ahead, exhaust flames shimmered. A German Dornier bomber. Garrison squeezed the trigger. 4 Hispano cannons roared in unison. The bomber erupted in sparks, then flame, then silence as wreckage tumbled earthward. The crew sat stunned for a heartbeat. They hadn't seen the enemy until the last second. The radar had carried them straight onto its tail. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guesswork. This was technology delivering death with precision. Word spread quickly among the squadrons. The Widow could do what no other fighter could: strike unseen, strike without warning, strike in absolute darkness. But what of the Germans? At first they dismissed the reports. Pilots scoffed in mess halls, saying American propaganda was exaggerating. A fighter that can see in the dark? Impossible. They laughed, just as they had laughed at radar years earlier, until it caught them off guard over the channel. Yet laughter has a way of dying. One crew returned shaken, their bomber shredded though they swore no fighter had been visible. Another reported tracers slashing from nowhere, as if ghosts fired from the night itself. Then more stories trickled in: crews who never returned, units that lost planes without explanation. Slowly the puzzle pieces formed a picture. A predator was out there, a predator painted black, a predator guided by something beyond human eyesight. Was it fear? Was it respect? Or was it both? As the Battle of the Bulge raged, the Widow's presence grew more critical. Supply lines, reinforcements, desperate German counterattacks, all moved under the cover of night. Widow crews rose to meet them, though their numbers were thin. Spare parts ran short, sorties stretched men and machines to breaking point. Yet each mission that ended with a German bomber falling meant hundreds, maybe thousands of lives spared on the ground. Think about that for a moment. Each radar contact wasn't just a plane. It was a set of bombs that would never fall, a factory that would keep producing, a family that would live to see another dawn. The Widow was proving itself. And though its European service was challenging, It planted seeds of fear in the minds of enemy pilots. Because what was worse than an opponent you could see? An opponent you couldn't. By early 1945, the German night skies were no longer safe havens. Pilots whispered to each other before missions, "Watch for the black ones." Some carried charms, others prayed harder. But all knew that somewhere out beyond the range of their eyes, an unseen hunter might already be closing in. And yet, Europe was only half the story. For the Pacific awaited, a theater where distances stretched into infinity, where storms swallowed fleets whole, where Japanese bombers stalked under clouds thicker than smoke. If the Widow had proven it could survive over France, could it dominate in the endless night of the Pacific? That question would soon be answered. The Pacific was another world entirely. In Europe, the Widow had stalked across short skies, over crowded towns and battered fields. But here it faced horizons that seemed endless. Patrols lasted hours over nothing but water, waves stretching to eternity. Storms loomed like mountains, clouds rolling black and furious, swallowing whole squadrons in minutes. For most aircraft this was a nightmare. For the Black Widow it was a hunting ground. On islands like Tinian, Morotai, and Saipan, Widow crews dug in. The enemy wasn't only German now. Japanese bombers still struck by moonlight, slipping through gaps in radar coverage, hoping to catch supply depots or naval convoys off guard. Fighters like the P-61 Tony slashed through the skies, agile and aggressive, determined to keep their airfields free from Allied intrusion. But they hadn't faced the Widow before. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron, renamed here for our story, earned a reputation quickly. Pilots called them the Phantoms of the Pacific. Why? Because their victories came from nowhere. One night, radar tracked 3 Japanese fighters circling, confident in their invisibility. Within minutes, 2 were spiraling into the ocean and the third was limping home, wings shredded. Word spread just as it had in Europe. There is a black plane in the night. You don't see it. You only feel it. Among Japanese squadrons, disbelief gave way to nervous laughter. And laughter gave way to whispers. The same happened with German pilots stationed far from the Reich, intercepting reports and rumors. They mocked the Widow as propaganda, a flying whale with painted wings. Around campfires they joked, "How could such a heavy, clumsy machine catch us?" But arrogance is always the most fragile armor. One night in the summer of 1945, that armor cracked. The scene, a humid night over the Pacific. The Widow crew, led by Captain Robert Mercer Hale with his radar operator Sergeant Tomas Echo Ruiz and gunner Alan Briggs, climbed into the void. Their call sign, Shadow 6. Their mission, intercept raiders approaching from the northwest. On the other side of the sky, a German exchange pilot flying with a Japanese unit, our fictional Lieutenant Karl Richter, was leading a small formation. Richter had scoffed at the Americans. He had told his comrades, "The Widow is just a rumor. A machine so heavy cannot hunt. Watch, tonight we will embarrass them." But the night had other plans. Ruiz's radar flickered alive. A blip. Then another. Then 3. Targets moving southeast, altitude 12,000. He leaned into his mic. "Contact. Range closing. Recommend intercept vector 270. Hale adjusted course, engines humming low. Invisible under the clouds, the Widow was gliding closer, closer. Meanwhile, Richter laughed into his radio, mocking. "No American can see us now. Even if they try, they'll never find us." His comrades chuckled, confidence bleeding through the static. But already the Widow was in position. 200 yards, Ruiz whispered. "Target locked. They don't know we're here." And in that instant, the Widow bared its fangs. 4 20mm cannons roared from beneath the fuselage. Tracers tore into the night, ripping through Richter's wingman before he even knew he was under attack. Flames blossomed, debris spiraled, the bomber plunged into the ocean below. Panic seized the formation. "Bandits! Bandits!" Voices screamed in German and Japanese. But where were the bandits? The sky looked empty. Only the dying glow of their comrades' wreckage illuminated the sea. Hale swung the turret forward. Briggs unleashed the Brownings, raking across a second fighter that tried to break away. Metal shredded. The plane twisted, snapped, and fell apart mid-dive. 2 kills in seconds. And then only Richter remained. The man who had laughed. He dove desperate, but the Widow followed. He climbed, but radar tracked him relentlessly. His mind raced. How? How do they know every move? Closing, Ruiz murmured. The radar scope glowed like a predator's eye. Richter twisted into the clouds, his canopy dripping with condensation, his heart pounding. He had mocked the widow, dismissed it as myth. But now, in the suffocating dark, he felt it behind him, silent, inevitable. And then tracers ripped past his cockpit, so close he could see the fiery streaks reflect off his goggles. He pulled hard left. The widow pulled harder. How long can a man outfly inevitability? How long before laughter turns to dread? At last Richter's luck snapped. Cannon shells slammed into his fuselage, tearing through engine and wing. His aircraft lurched, then erupted in a plume of fire. Richter never had time for another word. From the ground, Japanese troops looked skyward, confused. They saw only fire streaking into the sea. They never saw the widow. In the cockpit of Shadow 6, silence reigned for a moment. The radar screen was empty now. No more blips. Only ocean, only night. Finally Ruiz spoke, his voice calm but edged with awe. 3 contacts. 3 confirmed. They never saw us coming. Hale only nodded. The widow had spoken for itself. That night rumors spread like wildfire. Survivors whispered of a black phantom that struck from nowhere, that killed without being seen. Laughter died. Respect, tinged with terror, took its place. And thus the prophecy was fulfilled. The widow, mocked and doubted, became the executioner of those who underestimated it. The war drew to a close in August of 1945. Japan staggered, Germany lay in ruins, and the world prepared for peace. Yet even in those final nights, the Black Widow continued its silent patrols, a reminder that the shadows no longer belonged to the enemy. One story would echo louder than most, the tale of Lady in the Dark. On the night of August 14th, after Japan had announced its surrender, Captain Lee Kendall and his radar operator Lieutenant Scher, names preserved in history, still flew their mission. Orders remained orders until the ink of peace dried. Their radar picked up a lone target weaving low over the Pacific. Was it a rogue pilot refusing to accept defeat? Or merely a man seeking one final act of defiance? The widow gave chase. Guided by radar, they closed in silently. The Japanese fighter twisted, dropped chaff, tried to vanish into the black. Kendall matched every move, relentless but patient. And then, in a desperate maneuver, the enemy struck the sea. Not a bullet had been fired. The pressure alone, the unseen stalker pressing closer and closer, was enough to break him. That victory, bloodless yet final, became the last confirmed aerial kill of World War II. And it belonged to a Black Widow. Think about that symbolism. The first purpose-built night fighter in history, claiming the war's final aerial victory, without firing a shot. Was it not the perfect ending? But the widow's story did not end in 1945. In the years that followed, these black phantoms were repurposed for science. Operation Thunderstorm saw P-61s dive into raging storms, carrying instruments into lightning and turbulence. Pilots who had once stalked bombers now stalked nature itself, risking their lives so that future generations could fly more safely. And their influence lived on in steel and jet fuel. The Northrop F-89 Scorpion, America's first jet-powered all-weather interceptor, bore the widow's DNA. The concept of a 3-man crew. The emphasis on radar-guided interception. The heavy firepower designed to obliterate intruders at night or in cloud. Every American interceptor of the Cold War carried the Black Widow's shadow. So what is the widow's legacy? Is it the 127 enemy aircraft destroyed? The 18 V-1 rockets intercepted? The countless nights where bombs did not fall because a black hunter prowled above? Or is it the lesson it taught us? That arrogance in war is fatal, that laughter at the enemy's weapon can turn to screams in seconds, that technology can tilt the balance of survival when courage alone is not enough? Maybe it's all of those things. And maybe, just maybe, it's also a reminder for us today. Because history is not just stories of the past. History is a warning, a teacher, a whisper across time. Never underestimate the unseen. The German pilots laughed at America's P-61 Black Widow. They mocked its size, its shape, its purpose. But in the end, they learned the truth in the most brutal way possible. The widow didn't just hunt them. It destroyed their illusion of safety. And in doing so, it carved its name into history. Before we close, let me ask you this. How many other weapons of war began as rumors, dismissed as impossible, only to change the course of history? How many times has overconfidence blinded men to the danger lurking just beyond their sight? If questions like these fascinate you, if you want to uncover more stories of machines, battles, and legends that shaped the world, make sure you stay with us. Because here, every video is more than a history lesson. It's a journey into the past, told through the eyes of those who lived it, fought it, and sometimes never returned. So if you found yourself pulled into the shadows of the widow tonight, don't let this be the last time. Hit that like button, it tells us you want more. Subscribe and join our growing community of history enthusiasts. And ring the bell so you'll be the first to witness the next untold chapter of war's forgotten machines. The past still has many secrets left to reveal. And together we'll bring them into the light.